Brainwash, be gone.
A podcast for women who've left a high-control, high-demand religion. In every episode, we deconstruct one specific rule you were taught so you can let go of the harmful conditioning and live an amazing life on your own terms. Today, we'll be talking about
kids raised without church will be rebellious.
As a parent leaving a high-demand religion, many of us worry about what will happen to our kids. We've heard lots of terrible tales about how our children will be lost if we don't raise them in the faith. But listen to the end of this episode if you want to see why that's, first of all, not true at all. And secondly, we're also going to talk in a lot of detail about what you can do to be the best parent possible without religion. So it's hard enough, as we all know, to leave a high demand or high control religion. And many of us, once we get to the point of actually leaving, we realize, okay, we could handle the moral nuance of leaving this group and making our own moral, ethical, spiritual decisions outside of the framework of that group. But what will happen to our kids? Are we letting them down? Are they without guidance? Can we even imagine a universe in which a child grows up outside of the system that we ourselves were raised in? I'll often hear people who were raised in religious groups or authoritarian settings generally say things like, I can't believe my child said this. I would never have said that to my parents. I would never have done this thing that my child did. And I can definitely relate to that. It's shocking when, maybe you never talked back to your parents and then your child says what they think to you, or may even dare to give you some feedback about your parenting, or just to say things out of pocket about the world generally. And it's shocking to us because many of us had a childhood in which we never talked back. I know for me personally, I have talked directly and frankly with each of my parents exactly one time in my entire life. And it was after I was an adult, and it was tough. It was really tough. And as a teenager, I never did any of the things you weren't supposed to do. I completely suppressed myself, never rebelled, in quotes. And I spent, honestly, the last couple of decades trying to recover from that level of identity suppression of myself. And I know many of you maybe did the same as me, or maybe your coping mechanism was to do the opposite of what you were told and you did all the things. And maybe you have fears of your children doing that and putting themselves in danger as well in various ways. But here's the thing. The reason that we did not say those things to our parents or try different things as kids and as teens is because the consequences were so dire. You would be beaten, you would be ostracized, all love for you would be cut off from the family if you said or did any of these things. So it makes sense that many children in that scenario would not be doing those things. And it's not a success story if you manage to have children who never tell you what they think, who never express an emotion, who learn to completely suppress sadness and anger and personal needs and to just criticize themselves and things like that. That's a terrible tragedy, as we all know from having lived through it. So now that we're at the point where we've left these groups, we have seen for ourselves the harm, and we're doing something different for ourselves. It's time to take a totally new look at parenting, a totally new look at how we raise our kids. And the truth is that the structure and certainty of a high demand religion had a way of making us feel good about parenting. It provides a very clear structure. It's totally black and white. There are clear bounds on what every person in the entire community can do and not do and what their role is. All you have to do as a parent is strongly enforce that and strongly punish anything that's not that and just focus on getting that result. You're the enforcer, you know the alleged truth. And the truth is that sort of clarity is actually an illusion. Parenting is super difficult, period. Yes, you could try to abuse your children into being robots so that they do exactly what you want, and that's not successful parenting. You should not be proud when you have a church pew with 12 kids in it, and even the small children just stay perfectly sitting still, because it's not because they love God, it's because they will be beaten if they don't do that. So let's just call that what it is. Anyway, so parenting is difficult. And it certainly appears to be easier when there's that black and white worldview that answers for every detail of how we live. But the cost of parenting within the authoritarian religious structure is super high. We personally know it causes lifelong limitations in your personal expression, ability to relate in a healthy way, healthy communication patterns, self-care, experiences of depression, anxiety, other mental health problems, and more. And there is so much complexity and uncertainty when you approach parenting without the false clarity of that high control religion. It can make us as parents super uncomfortable, but I think we owe it to our kids to be uncomfortable and to do everything we can to learn to parent them in a healthier way. We do not have to pass all of this stuff on to the next generation. Let's leave some of this junk behind. So I definitely do not know all the answers, but I've been at this for a few years, and one of my children is an adult and the other child is still a child, work in progress. But I have some theories that I've developed over time and learned from people who I think are doing a great job in terms of ways that we can approach this. I think the first thing that we want to look at is really, what's the goal for your parenting? How do you succeed at parenting? What's sort of an ideal outcome that you imagine? Because just like in so many realms, if you don't know what you're going for, often the decisions that you make along the way are not going to get you to that point. So, our old goal while we were in this religion was to raise the kids to be perfect members of this high demand religion who didn't ask questions, who didn't think critically, and followed all the rules exactly. That's not going to be our goal anymore. Once we've left, we realized that's not healthy. We don't want to do that anymore. So what's our goal? I feel like for me, my goal was and is to raise my kids to be functional, healthy adults. I want to raise them with as little trauma as possible. I mean, it's not possible to have a life without trauma, but certainly to the degree I can minimize it, I want to do that. I want to teach my kids to follow their own inner guidance. I want them to be able to live their adulthood making their own decisions about what's best for their lives. I want them to feel loved. I want them to know that I love them simply for who they are and not because they achieved this certain thing, because they did what I wanted, or any other sort of transactional thing. I just want them to feel loved and safe and able to work out the challenges of life in the context of our family and their relationship with me. So your idea of what you want for your children's lives, how you would ideally want your parenting to impact your children's lives might be different, but probably for a lot of us, it'll be something like that. And then once you have that idea of what the ideal end result is, you can work backwards in some ways and realize things like, hey, if I want them to know it's okay to make mistakes and to love themselves, well, then I'm going to have to allow them to make mistakes growing up. I'm going to have to give them opportunities to test out their own decision making in a safer arena where it's not super high stakes like life and death, but they're getting practice making decisions, making mistakes, and repairing and recovering from those mistakes. I'm going to have to allow them to see me make my own mistakes and how I fix them, and that I can still love myself and move on from those mistakes, that I can change my mind. If I want them to be able to feel their feelings and communicate effectively once they're adults, well, they're pretty much going to have their home life with me be a laboratory in how to do that. So as a parent, I would necessarily have the potential discomfort of experiencing exactly how my child feels about things and trying to help them navigate those feelings, how to feel feelings without suppressing them, but while still respecting people, and how to productively negotiate and communicate with the people you live with for solutions that are helpful for everyone. I would necessarily have to make sure my child has tools about making decisions, about changing their mind, about repairing relationships when they go too far in some direction. And I'm not going to lie, almost everything about this is more work because there's just way more nuance than raising children in the conservative religious way that many of us experienced. And I'll give you a more specific example too. I mean, I was raised with, and I'm sure almost all of us were raised with, the concept that absolutely no sex until marriage, maybe a chaste kiss or maybe not, depending on your particular group that you left. But basically, if you have sex before marriage, then you're going to hell. You'll also be ruined. You'll have a terrible marriage, blah, 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 all the things. So to be raised that way, it was such a hardline rule. And all the parents did was just make sure they knew your whereabouts constantly, not allow you to be alone with members of the opposite sex, just guilt, shame, embed those guilt, shame systems in your psyche so that you would basically be having a lot of trouble with any sort of exploration in that area. But when I was raising my kids, I thought, oh no, if I get rid of that hardline rule and I actually want my children to have a healthy view of their own body, of their own pleasure, I want them to have healthy relationships, I want them to be able to have age-appropriate experiences that grow over time until the point where they actually are ready to have a partner and experience all the things. So for that more nuanced take, it's like, oh my goodness, they would have to understand the various range of physical activities that can happen between two people instead of just a very simplistic 1 or 2 sentence statement of like what sex is that many of us were given. So they have to understand all the things that are possible. The kids would have to understand, how do you make a decision about what feels good to you when you're relating to someone else? How do you express that to a potential partner? How do you maintain physical safety if you decide to do certain activities that carry certain risks? How do you maintain emotional safety to the degree possible? How do you respect other people's decisions and check in and make sure your partner also wants the thing that you want and respect their autonomy and choice? How do you handle disappointment in relationships and heartbreak and a bunch of other things? Because life is hard. It's a very complex issue if you want to actually grow and learn and grow into a functioning adult. So, this is a big project. Parenting is no joke. I know you all know it. My goodness, it's the hardest thing, by far the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I feel like I've done some hard things. But I think one reason, it can honestly even be harder to leave religion after having kids or harder to do any kind of personal development work is simply the guilt that many of us feel about what we already passed on to the next generation before we even knew better. But until you know something, you don't know it. So we can't blame ourselves for that. We can only have the courage to make any changes that we can now and pass on as little of the insanity as possible. So every little piece of the craziness that we do not pass on to our children is a victory worth celebrating. It doesn't have to be perfect. This may be a multi-generational attempt to escape the mind control and the psychological impacts that come from living in such a restricted environment that's designed to keep you trapped. It's awesome that we are all here doing that. We are helping the future of humanity by doing this. It's such an exciting time to be alive that we can all be doing this and that we can be in contact with each other, to hear these stories, to encourage each other, to share what's working for us, and to move humans out of these inhibiting structures that are just so damaging. So this is a huge topic, but here are a couple of reflections to wrap up our time on this topic today. How comfortable do you feel with allowing your children to make mistakes or chart their own path? What do you think would be the best outcome for your parenting efforts? What do you wish for your children's future? And what's one thing you can do or learn to help this become a reality?
Do you believe in our mission here at Brainwash Be Gone? Then please leave us a review in your podcast app. It helps other women find us so we can keep on busting more sisters out.